There is a kind of walk that doesn't attract applause. It doesn't come with followers, cameras, or affirmation. It doesn't make headlines or go viral. It's a quieter journey, one that often begins when the noise of the world becomes unbearable and something deep inside you whispers, "Step away." Not to run, not to hide, but to be found. Walking alone with God isn't about leaving the world behind. It's about returning to who you are without it. It's about removing the layers that the world asked you to wear so you can uncover the truth that God already placed inside you. It's not loneliness, it's clarity. It's not weakness, it's strength that doesn't shout. We live in a world obsessed with identity. Everyone is building one, polishing one, presenting one. Social media profiles become digital masks. Titles replace names. Accomplishments turn into personality. But the truth is, very few people actually know who they are underneath it all. Not the roles they play, not the expectations they carry, just who they are at the core. That kind of clarity doesn't come from the crowd. It doesn't come from applause. It comes from solitude. It comes from walking alone. When you walk alone with God, the noise begins to fade, slowly at first. The external definitions, the ones that seemed so important, start to feel distant. You're no longer driven by what others say you should be. That voice that once dictated your worth, based on likes, followers, income, or status, begins to lose its power. In its place, something else rises, something quieter but much more certain. It's the voice that says, "You are already enough." This isn't about self-confidence, it's about divine alignment. It's about discovering that who you are has never been dependent on what you do. That your worth isn't up for negotiation, that you were loved before you achieved anything and chosen before you proved anything. But to hear that truth, the room has to go silent, and that silence can be terrifying if you've never experienced it. It's in the quiet moments alone with God that our deepest insecurities rise, the ones we've buried under ambition or performance. But here's the key. Those insecurities don't rise to shame us. They rise so we can finally confront them. When there's no one left to impress, we begin to see how much of our lives were spent performing, and that realization can be heavy. But it's also liberating because now you have a choice. You can keep playing the role, or you can step into the identity that was already written for you. The one that doesn't shift when people do. The one that stands even when everything else falls. The most powerful people are not the loudest. They're the ones who have clarity in their spirit. They know who they are, and more importantly, they know whose they are. That kind of identity doesn't come from the world. It's not something you can buy, build, or brand. It's something you discover in stillness, in surrender. It's revealed when you walk away from the crowd long enough to hear God speak directly to you. There's something profound about realizing that solitude is not the absence of others, but the presence of something greater. When you walk alone with God, you're not actually alone. But the world won't tell you that. The world will tell you that solitude is weakness, that you must stay connected at all times to be relevant, to be secure, that if you're not visible, you're not valuable. But the opposite is true. When you disconnect from the constant stream of validation, you make room for divine validation. Security is a funny thing. Most people spend their lives chasing it through external means: money, relationships, career, reputation. But those things are fragile, they shift. They disappear. Real stability doesn't come from securing everything around you. It comes from being rooted in something unshakable inside of you. That's what walking with God develops. Not just faith, but internal steadiness. It's the kind of steadiness that doesn't flinch when criticism comes, the kind that doesn't need to clap back when misunderstood, the kind that can smile in silence while others shout for attention. Not because you've given up, but because you've tapped into something deeper than public opinion. You've anchored yourself in presence, not performance. Many people believe peace is found when everything around them calms down. So they spend their lives trying to manage situations, people, outcomes, hoping that if they can get everything in order, they'll finally feel secure. But that version of peace is temporary. It relies on control, and control is a fragile god. One shift, one crisis, and it all unravels. The people who truly carry peace, the ones who stay grounded in storms, aren't grounded because life is easy. They're grounded because they've walked alone with God long enough to understand that peace is an inside job. It doesn't require external calm. It requires internal conviction. And that conviction is born through repeated moments of surrender. It's cultivated by choosing trust when logic says otherwise, by returning again and again to that quiet place where your soul meets something sacred. The strength that comes from solitude isn't flashy. It's not the kind of strength that demands attention. It's the kind that walks into a room and brings calm without saying a word. The kind that listens more than it speaks, that doesn't compete, that doesn't compare. Because when you know where your worth comes from, you stop chasing it in other people's reflections. We're conditioned to believe that being alone is something to avoid, that success is found in groups, that visibility equals significance. But some of the most significant breakthroughs happen in hidden places, in deserts, in prayer rooms, on long walks where no one is watching, where there's no applause, just awareness. It's there, in those hidden places, that character is formed, that purpose is refined, that direction becomes clear. The path of walking alone with God won't always be comfortable. It will stretch you. It will challenge everything you've used as a crutch, but it will also anchor you in something deeper than emotion. It will introduce you to the version of yourself that isn't tossed by trends or tied to temporary identities. It will teach you that value doesn't come from visibility, and impact doesn't always come with attention. You start to lead differently when you've been through that process. You don't need to push your voice forward in every moment. You choose your words more carefully. You become more patient, more discerning. You aren't rattled by silence because you've seen how powerful it is. You've learned that what you cultivate in private eventually shapes how you carry yourself in public. People who walk with God don't have to announce it. You can feel it in how they move, in what they don't say, in the peace they carry. It's not manufactured, it's developed, and it's sustained through quiet, intentional time, in presence, away from platforms, away from performance, away from pressure. What the world calls isolation, God often uses for revelation. What looks like walking alone is actually the beginning of walking differently. Not based on external direction, but internal conviction. Not just filled with goals, but guided by purpose. And in a world that confuses busyness with meaning, the ability to slow down and walk in step with something greater is no small thing. It's everything. There's a moment in everyone's life when the crowd fades. Not just physically, but emotionally. The applause stops. The affirmations grow quiet. And you find yourself standing somewhere between who you were and who you're becoming. It's in that space, often uncomfortable and uncertain, that something sacred begins. It's where disconnection from the world gives rise to a deeper connection, one that isn't shaped by popularity or performance, but by presence. Not your own, but something divine. We crave clarity, but our lives are filled with noise. The truth is, connection with God doesn't happen through constant motion. It happens in moments of deliberate stillness, not passive waiting, but active listening. There's a difference. Stillness isn't the absence of productivity, it's the birthplace of insight. And that insight doesn't arrive in the middle of multitasking. It comes when we unplug long enough to let our minds breathe, when we detach from the endless loop of notifications and opinions and actually return to the original frequency we were designed to hear. The reason solitude matters so much is because it removes interference. When you unplug from the world, even for a short while, you begin to hear differently. You stop processing everything through the filters of ego and urgency. You start sensing what's actually essential. The loudest voice is rarely the wisest, and often the truth that changes us arrives in a whisper. That whisper doesn't compete with chaos, it waits for quiet. Disconnection isn't about rejection. It's not an act of rebellion against the world. It's an act of reverence towards something greater. You're not turning away from people, you're turning toward presence. You're not isolating to escape, you're retreating to align. There's an important difference. When you walk alone with God, you begin to see how much of your life was shaped by unspoken pressure. Pressure to be understood, pressure to be liked, pressure to meet expectations that were never yours to carry. In solitude, those expectations start to fall away, not all at once, but layer by layer. And as they do, what's left is something more honest, more whole, you. The irony is, the more you disconnect from the world, the more connected you actually become to truth, to clarity, to meaning. You begin to notice the things that truly matter. Peace becomes more valuable than praise. Integrity becomes more satisfying than image. And stillness becomes a strength, not a weakness. It's easy to think that walking alone means being left behind, but often it means you're being called ahead. The world moves fast, but growth moves deep. Depth requires time. And when you stop trying to keep up with everything and start leaning into stillness, your soul begins to stretch, not toward achievement, but toward alignment. That's why solitude doesn't isolate, it refines, it purifies, it brings purpose into focus in a way that crowds never can. Because when you're surrounded by others, it's easy to absorb their voices, their fears, their agendas. But when it's just you and God, you begin to hear something different. You begin to ask different questions. You stop asking, "What do they expect of me?" and start asking, "What was I made for?" That question has weight. And the answer doesn't always arrive wrapped in clarity. Sometimes it's revealed one step at a time. But in solitude, you learn how to be okay with that. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you start trusting. There's something incredibly humbling about realizing that the greatest work God does in us often happens when no one else is watching. That purpose isn't discovered in performance but in presence. That you don't have to manufacture impact, you just have to remain available. The path of solitude is uncomfortable because it confronts everything in us that still believes we have to earn our worth. But the longer you walk that path, the more you realize that worth was never the question. The question has always been alignment. Are you willing to strip away what the world celebrates to live in what God created? That's not a small decision. It changes everything. Refining moments don't usually look like victory. They often look like silence, like waiting, like walking without immediate results. But it's in those moments that foundations are built. It's in the waiting that patience is forged. It's in the stillness that clarity deepens. And it's in the quiet that purpose takes root. Purpose isn't a goal to chase, it's a truth to carry. And carrying it well requires discipline. It requires returning to solitude even when things are going well, especially when things are going well, because the temptation to drift doesn't come only in hard times. It comes in success. It comes when the crowd returns and the applause begins again. That's when you're most tempted to lose yourself. But if you've practiced solitude, if you've built that rhythm of stillness into your life, you'll recognize the shift and you'll know how to return. Solitude doesn't make you superior. It makes you clear. It keeps your motives honest. It keeps your direction aligned. And it reminds you that impact isn't about being seen. It's about being sent. You don't need a platform to walk in purpose. You just need obedience. And obedience is forged in the quiet, not the spotlight. We live in a generation that fears being alone. But what if alone is where the answers are? What if alone is where calling is clarified? What if alone is the only space where the volume of the world is low enough for the voice of God to be heard? Not everyone will understand your walk, and that's okay. It's not their walk. It's not their calling. You weren't made to follow the path of convenience. You were made to follow the pull of something deeper. And that pull doesn't always lead you where others are going, but it always leads you to who you were made to be. The beautiful thing is, you never truly walk alone when you walk with God. It just looks that way from the outside, but on the inside there's a strength, a direction, a presence that carries you. And once you've walked with that presence, once you've tasted that kind of peace, you won't want to go back to a life of noise. Because nothing the world offers compares to the clarity that comes from being rooted in purpose. And clarity like that only grows in solitude. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness is a void. It aches. It isolates. But solitude, real solitude, is strength. It sharpens. It roots. The more you walk with purpose, the more you begin to notice how solitude becomes less about being away from people and more about being aligned with something deeper. And the further you go in that alignment, the more you realize not everyone can walk with you. This is not because they don't care, it's because they can't carry what you are assigned to hold. Callings are personal, they are specific, they're not designed for group projects. You may walk with many, but not everyone can walk with you into the places where obedience requires sacrifice. And that's often the hardest part of the journey, realizing that growing in purpose sometimes means outgrowing certain relationships. There's a quiet grieving in that, because when we begin our lives, most of our identity is tied to community, family, friends, shared experiences. We build meaning around togetherness. But purpose doesn't always grow in groups. Sometimes it grows in isolation. Sometimes it grows through pruning, through letting go. The more you pursue purpose, the more you realize that holding on to people for comfort can become a barrier to clarity. Not because they are bad, but because their vision may not stretch as far as the path you're being asked to walk. And that's okay. We were never meant to be everything to everyone, but we were meant to be faithful to what's been placed in us. You don't grow by keeping every voice close. You grow by protecting the voices that align with your direction and letting go of the ones that keep you circling the same old pattern. Walking alone isn't about cutting people off, it's about staying true to the alignment that transforms you. And transformation can't always happen in crowded spaces. There comes a time when you must choose between being understood and being obedient. Most people will choose understanding. It's safer, it's more comfortable. But those who walk closely with God often choose obedience, even when it costs understanding, even when it costs applause, even when it costs companionship. There's a deep peace that comes with knowing you are where you are meant to be, even if no one else sees it. That peace doesn't come from validation, it comes from alignment. And alignment is what keeps you grounded when distractions try to pull you in every direction. The irony is, the more obedient you become, the less you crave affirmation. Not because it's wrong to be affirmed, but because it's no longer the fuel you live on. A setting apart. Not to run from something, but to be prepared for something. When you walk alone with God, you realize you're not retreating because you're weak. You're being readied because something within you is being strengthened. That shift in mindset changes how you handle transitions. It changes how you interpret seasons of quiet. You stop seeing them as losses and start seeing them as preparation. You understand that the silence isn't punishment. It's a setup for something bigger than what you can see. And because you've let go of needing constant companionship, you learn how to carry peace, not just receive it. This kind of peace is different from the kind that circumstances provide. It's deeper than situational calm. It's not the absence of conflict, but the presence of stability, and it doesn't fluctuate with emotion. It's the peace that keeps you anchored when everything around you shifts. The kind of peace that makes no sense to the world but total sense to those who have tasted it. When your peace comes from alignment with purpose, you no longer react to every distraction. You become more discerning with your time. You stop chasing what's loud and start building what's lasting. And slowly, your life begins to shift, not through dramatic moves, but through consistent decisions rooted in quiet conviction. It's that conviction that allows you to walk through uncertain seasons with confidence, not because you know the outcome, but because you know who walks with you. You don't need all the answers when you know you're aligned with the right source. And that alignment is forged in the quiet, in solitude, in the space where trust grows. Trust isn't built through constant affirmation. It's built in the quiet tension between what you feel and what you believe. It's built when you stay the course even when nothing around you confirms it. That's why solitude is essential. It trains your trust. It reveals where you still depend on sight instead of faith, and it gives you the strength to keep going even when no one claps. Over time, you realize that the people meant for your path will recognize your rhythm. They won't demand access to every moment, and they won't question your silence. They'll understand that solitude isn't distance, it's depth, and they'll respect it. But until you find those people, don't rush the journey. Don't fill the quiet with noise. Don't trade peace for attention. The world will offer many shortcuts, many quick paths to success, influence, validation. But those shortcuts often bypass depth. They trade roots for reach. And without roots, nothing lasts. The deeper your roots go in solitude, the stronger you'll stand when storms come. Because they will come. But when your peace is real, you don't have to perform calmness. You carry it. When you walk alone with God, you begin to see that the strength you build in the quiet isn't just for you, it's for others too. Because one day, someone else will watch how you carry yourself in a storm, and they'll ask how you did it. And your answer won't be a strategy, it will be a story shaped by stillness, by solitude, by walking alone, not to escape but to align. And that alignment will do something the world can't manufacture. It will ground you, it will guide you, and ultimately it will change not just where you go, but who you become along the way.